Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of voices, as if life keeps moving around you while you hover in a pocket of silence that no one else can hear? That sensation is the quiet signature of the fear of being alone. It rarely arrives with sirens. It slips in during pauses between conversations, the dimming laughter after a long day, the soft light of a phone with no new notifications. It is astonishingly common, a private ache that visits nearly every mind. What we call the fear of being alone is not only about being physically by yourself. It is a deeper psychological current that runs under thought and mood, shaping how we read the world. Clinicians sometimes refer to it as autotophobia or monophobia, a fear of isolation, of being cut off, or of simply being with one's own company. Yet a label only hints at what is happening. The fear takes root in the way the human brain is built for connection. We are social by design. Across our evolutionary past, belonging to a group meant safety, food, and protection. Exclusion meant risk. So when we sense separation, ancient circuits light up. The body marks it as danger, even if nothing is actually threatening us. The mind starts to whisper its old lines. You are unguarded. You are exposed. You might not be enough on your own. Here lies the tension that defines so much of inner life. The same solitude we resist is often the doorway to clarity and growth. Artists, scientists, explorers, poets, all have stepped into quiet rooms and met themselves there. Many great minds have described solitude as difficult when we are young and unexpectedly rewarding with time, a taste that matures as awareness matures. In stillness, attention can deepen. In the absence of noise, memory and imagination can set their own rhythm, yet the pull to escape remains strong. We reach for the endless scroll, we fill the air with background chatter, we correct silence with anything that will do. Why does it feel so intolerable at certain moments? The answer is not simply loneliness or a generic social anxiety. It is the collision of two truths. We are wired to seek others, and we are also called to encounter ourselves. When those truths meet, the nervous system protests, the mind invents distractions, and the heart looks for a crowd. What happens next depends on whether we treat solitude as a punishment or as a practice, as emptiness to be feared, or as space where attention can learn to stay. Research from teams at the University of Chicago and UCLA points to a striking pattern. When people sit alone with their thoughts, they often meet themselves more honestly than they ever do in conversation. The mind begins to ask the questions we dodge in motion. Who am I beneath the roles I play? What do I actually want? Am I living in alignment with what I value? For many of us, the first answers feel sharp. Solitude does not only highlight what is missing, it illuminates what is real. And reality, when it conflicts with our self-image, can feel like a threat. Picture a single person in a quiet room. No music, no phone, no company. Within minutes, most people will try to self-distract, even with activities that are only mildly engaging. Some will reach for a device out of habit. Others will stand up and leave the stillness altogether. The avoidance is not random. It is a learned move to protect ourselves from unfiltered thought, from the fears we bury, the regrets we keep postponing, the stories we do not want to update. The fear of being alone often masks a more precise fear, facing a mind that will not let us look away. Here is the twist. Even as we run from solitude, the mind is built to benefit from it. Reflection can be intrinsically rewarding. There is a subtle lift when we work through a problem internally, when a vague feeling resolves into language, when a pattern finally clicks. Writers, philosophers, contemplatives have practiced this for centuries. Being alone is not the pain. Resisting aloneness is. The moment we label silence as emptiness, we strip it of its potential. When we treat it as space for attention to explore, it becomes a studio for making sense of experience. Watch a child building a sandcastle or sketching in a notebook. They are practicing exactly this, They wander, tinker, invent, and evaluate without the constant pressure of an audience. As we grow, cultural cues start to recode the signal. Solitude becomes suspect. People hear that being alone means being unwanted or socially deficient. We forget that many of humanity's most generative breakthroughs emerged far from the crowd. Leonardo da Vinci refining his observations, Virginia Woolf shaping the inner life on the page, Nikola Tesla thinking in diagrams before a single wire was laid. Each found clarity and direction in the absence of noise. There is also an emotional core to this fear that is intensely human. We worry about being left behind. We brace against rejection. We learn to tie our worth to proximity, as if value required constant proof from others. That anxiety can steer whole biographies. People remain in careers that shrink them, in friendships that drain them, in relationships that keep them small, all to avoid the quiet questions that arise when the day slows down. Yet a quiet room offers a different kind of opportunity to meet yourself without performance, to sit with thoughts until they reveal their shape, to discover that beneath the urge to escape is a mind capable of telling the truth and surviving it. Here is where the psychology becomes especially revealing. When we are alone, the brain's default mode network comes online, a constellation of regions linked to self-reflection, mental time travel, daydreaming, and future planning. In that state, we sift patterns, weigh choices, rewrite narratives, and generate fresh insight. Solitude becomes the mind's workshop, a quiet lab where growth takes shape. The moments that unsettle us often double as the exact conditions that show us what we value and who we are becoming. There is a common confusion worth untangling. Loneliness is an emotional signal that we feel disconnected from others. Solitude is simply the fact of being by ourselves. A person can sit alone and feel deeply grounded, or stand in a crowded room and feel hollow. The fear of being alone mixes these experiences until absence feels like failure. More often than not, what we lack is not external company, but an internal sense of connection with ourselves. So how do we work with that fear? One practice is intentional solitude. This is neither withdrawal nor self-punishment. It is a deliberate appointment with one's own mind to explore thoughts and emotions without noise. Begin small. 5 minutes of quiet at the start of the day. An evening walk without a phone. A page of journaling with no expectation of brilliance. In time, the nervous system learns a new association. Solitude stops reading as threat and starts registering as resource. Curiosity steps in where fear once stood. Reflection begins to outpace worry. Mindfulness helps for the same reason. It trains attention to observe the present without judgment. The mind learns that being alone is not dangerous, that even uncomfortable thoughts can rise and pass without commanding action. Observation interrupts reactivity. As that skill grows, the anxiety that powers the fear of aloneness starts to thin out, and the inner world becomes navigable instead of overwhelming. There is also a deeper layer that many sense but seldom name. The fear of being alone can echo the fear of finitude. The inner world is vast and candid. It surfaces neglected dreams and unspoken doubts. It asks questions that do not accept easy answers. Yet that depth is where authenticity resides. Choosing to sit with oneself, to stay present rather than escape, is how creativity, wisdom, and resilience take root. This fear shapes how we choose partners and friends. Many people enter relationships not from desire, but as an exit from solitude. They fill the calendar with noise to avoid the quiet. The relationships that endure tend to grow from a different soil. Self-knowledge. A person who has sat through silence, who has felt fear and stayed, carries a kind of depth that invites genuine connection rather than dependency. Picture a lake. On the surface, the water is easily disturbed, mirroring every gust of wind and every passing shadow from the shore. Beneath the surface, layers settle into stillness. The deeper you go, the steadier it becomes, and the more clearly the lake reflects what is real. Only by diving beneath the surface into the still and quiet depths do we find clarity, hidden treasures, and the larger patterns that hold our lives together. Solitude is that descent. Fear is the restless water above. When we choose to go down rather than fight the waves, we discover what is unseen, untouched, and real. This points to a deeper truth. Being alone is not a condition to avoid, it is a capacity to train. A mind that cannot tolerate its own company struggles the way a body struggles without breath. The fear of aloneness is natural, yet it is not fixed. It is a shadow cast by avoidance. When we bring attention, curiosity, and self-compassion to it, the shadow recedes. Research on emotional resilience consistently finds that people who build comfort with solitude become more self-aware, more creative, and more stable in their mood. They tend to solve problems with greater flexibility, communicate more clearly, and often form richer relationships. The paradox is simple. By learning to be by ourselves, we learn how to be fully present with others. Presence sharpens, life feels more vivid. We show up as ourselves rather than as a version edited to please the room. So the next time that quiet unease rises, when the door closes and the house goes still, treat it like a signal. The fear is real, and it is also instructive. It asks you to slow your breath, to set aside performance, to meet yourself without disguise. It invites you to listen to the quiet, to watch your thoughts, to face the truths you keep postponing. Sit with it and refuse to flee, and the mind often opens into a field of clarity and creative energy that the noise of the world cannot deliver. The fear of being alone is not an enemy. It is a compass that aims you toward authenticity, away from distraction and toward depth. In that tension between fear and presence, we discover the raw materials of wisdom, resilience, and joy. To face solitude is to touch what is most human in us, and to find, sometimes with real surprise, that we are not only able to stand on our own, but able to feel fully alive while we do. There is an even more profound lesson embedded in this fear. Solitude forces us to face impermanence. Time moves differently when we are alone. Minutes elongate and reveal the quiet frameworks of our days that constant activity keeps hidden. In that expanded time, we notice that experiences, relationships, and emotions pass. Every conversation ends, every laugh fades. The recognition is both unsettling and freeing. It reminds us that nothing in the outer world can anchor us completely. The anchor we can trust is the one we cultivate within. This is why the fear of being alone is often tied to the fear of losing support, validation, or love. Lean into solitude, and something shifts. The only support that endures is the support we build inside. Self-reliance is not isolation. It is the understanding that worth, safety, and joy do not need to be borrowed from the presence of others. They can be grown internally, quietly, and patiently, like a winter garden gathering strength beneath the frost. In that inner garden, we find resilience, creativity, and a steadiness that outside forces cannot shake. Studies in positive psychology even suggest that intentionally chosen solitude can heighten empathy, because people who reflect on their own emotions with care often become more attuned to the emotions of others. When we sit long enough to watch our own thoughts rise and fall, something subtle shifts. We begin to recognize similar patterns in other people. By learning to stay with our own discomfort without immediately fixing or fleeing, we grow patience and emotional intelligence. What starts as the fear of being alone can be refined into conscious solitude, and that solitude becomes a bridge. Not a bridge to withdrawal, but to deeper connection, because the person who understands their own mind can meet another person's mind with care. The path from fear to understanding rarely moves in a straight line. Most of us feel waves of restlessness when the room goes quiet. We reach for the next video, the endless feed, the to-do list that replenishes itself. We repeat the old story that being alone is empty, risky, or pointless. Fear, however, is not a verdict. It is information. It signals an edge where growth is possible. Each time we practice staying present with ourselves, without escape, fear loosens its grip and shifts roles. It becomes a teacher, a guide, and eventually a doorway into self-mastery. Philosophers have mapped this territory for centuries. Seneca, writing from the Stoic tradition, urged people to become at ease in their own company. He noticed how easily a life can be spent evading quiet through noise, busyness, and shallow companionship. When we learn to welcome stillness, we gain a different kind of freedom. Freedom from the need to be constantly validated. Freedom to examine the inner landscape with honesty and curiosity. Freedom to choose our actions rather than be pulled by habit. Neuroscience gestures in the same direction. Extended periods of intentional solitude are linked with the brain systems that support self-reflection, creative recombination, and flexible problem-solving. People who grow comfortable with being by themselves often report higher satisfaction, clearer decisions, and greater resilience in difficult seasons. The mind tends to reward those who can enter their own depths without panic. Those who are willing to swim the quiet waters of consciousness with awareness rather than avoidance discover that clarity accumulates. None of this makes the work easy. Solitude requires courage because fear prefers noise. It raises the questions we are tempted to ignore. Am I enough? Will my life matter? What happens if I fail? Sitting with these questions slowly and steadily reveals a simple power. The capacity to hold ourselves, the ability to soothe our own nervous system, the freedom to create meaning from the raw materials of experience. That realization begins to reorganize how we move through the world. It changes the texture of relationships and the way we meet challenge. Being alone stops feeling like exile and starts to resemble a sanctuary. There is a delicate insight tucked beneath the fear as well. Often it masks a deeper anxiety about impermanence. When we sit quietly, time stretches, and we remember that everything ends. The recognition can stir unease, yet it also calls us to presence. We begin to notice the small moments that build a life. We taste gratitude in ordinary scenes that once felt invisible. Solitude turns the mind into a microscope, revealing the fine grain of experience, the hidden structure of emotions, the faint threads that connect one thought to the next. This is where creativity enters. In the quiet, associations have room to meet. Ideas that would never touch in a crowded hour find each other and fuse into something new. Solitude becomes a studio where attention can play, revise, and risk without performance, and where the first sparks of original work finally have air. Many of the world's great works took shape in quiet rooms while their creators sat alone with their thoughts. Novels, paintings, and theories were drafted in the stillness that most of us try to avoid. The fear of being alone often signals untapped potential. It hints that the inner life is waiting to be explored, that creativity is knocking softly, and we have not yet learned how to open the door. In this light, solitude becomes a canvas. The mind learns to paint its most honest colors when there is no audience to please. It also helps to recognize how modern tools amplify the fear. Social platforms, notifications, and perpetual connectivity offer an effortless exit from the present moment. We scroll and swipe because silence can feel abrasive. Yet this is connection in appearance only. Real understanding develops when we allow attention to settle and meet experience directly. Emotional depth requires the space to feel. Insight asks for focus. The challenge in our era is straightforward and demanding. Stay with yourself, even when escape is one tap away. That is a practice in discipline, mindfulness, and courage. There is a deeper truth that emerges once we accept the challenge. The fear of being alone functions like a mirror. It shows us what we have not faced, the conversations we keep delaying, the projects we postpone, the grief we mute. When we engage with that fear, rather than run from it, we move toward a clearer map of our values and motives. Solitude shifts roles. It becomes a teacher and a companion. It sharpens perception so that the world looks less filtered and more real. Translating this into daily life works best through small, repeatable steps. Begin with brief intervals, 5 or 10 minutes each day without distraction. Sit, breathe, and simply notice. Add a journal so that thoughts can land on paper where they are easier to examine. Include mindfulness practice or guided reflection to train non-judgmental awareness. Introduce creative time in solitude. Draw, write, make music, even if the results feel rough. These activities metabolize anxious energy into form and meaning. Keep reminding yourself that solitude is not absence, it is a different kind of presence. Presence with self, with attention, with life as it is. Seen this way, the fear of aloneness is an invitation. It invites you to slow down, to meet your interior world, to learn the texture of your own mind. It reminds you that relationships and achievements rest on the same foundation, the ability to hold steady in your own company. As that ability grows, the mind that once flinched at quiet begins to flourish in it. Being alone is not emptiness or punishment. It is a path that leads toward clarity, wisdom, creativity, and authentic connection. What opens on that path is simple and quietly radical. You discover that your life, your thoughts, your dreams, and your inner voice carry their own worth. They do not require constant proof from the presence of others. They can stand on their own, and so can you. And in that recognition, a wider freedom appears. The courage to stay with ourselves, the curiosity to explore the depths we once skirted. The quiet joy of realizing that we are not abandoned in the inner world, because the most enduring companion we will ever meet is the one who thinks and breathes within our own skin. With that insight, the old fear begins to shift. What once tightened around us becomes a source of energy, a catalyst that pushes us to grow. The same quiet that used to unsettle now becomes a studio for invention and reflection, a steady room where creation can take shape. When we embrace solitude as a gift rather than a sentence, life takes on a richer texture. Colors sharpen, meanings gather. The human experience feels deeper and more honest than the hurried version we perform in crowded hours. Solitude is not a curse to outlast. It is a resource to be cherished, a space where attention learns to listen and imagination learns to build. As we practice this, fear does not vanish entirely. It softens. It steps back far enough for a different picture to come into view, one in which connection is stronger because it is chosen, in which purpose is clearer because it is examined, in which aliveness is felt because we are finally present for it. This is the paradox that becomes visible when we stop running. By befriending solitude, we become more connected. By sitting with quiet, we hear more of the world. By facing the tremor of uncertainty, we gain a steadier form of confidence. The mind that learns to rest in its own company stops searching for constant rescue and starts participating in life with integrity. And in that participation, the fear of being alone recedes enough to reveal what was waiting all along. A life more connected, more meaningful, and more alive than we thought possible.